everyone. I'm Karie Johnston, Vice President of the Board of Directors for the Inspire Awards, and we're here today in another one of our series of videos to introduce to you the nominees and recipients for 2020. And today I am pleased to introduce to you Adam, is it Zevo?
Zevo.
Zevo, our recipient of the Innovator of the Year. So, Adam, I'd like to welcome you, and I'm so happy that you're here with us today to share a little bit of information about yourself.
Cool.
So, I'm wondering if you can please tell our audience a little bit about your work in relation to your nomination and the receipt of the Innovator of the Year award.
Well, so I founded and direct an LGBT arts-based advocacy campaign called Love is Love is Love, which I founded in 2016 in response to the Orlando Pulse shooting. Essentially, after the Pulse shooting, I saw many of my friends on social media taking photos of themselves with their partners or friends and posting that online, saying that they, weren't afraid to be who they are. And that was something that seemed very cathartic to them because it seemed to be a symbolic act of resistance against violence. And so at the time, I'd been contracted by an LGBT arts festival based in the Village to produce a photo booth. And so I spoke with the client and said, why don't we reconceptualize this and make it something that's more relevant to something that just happened? Because the festival was going to happen in 2 weeks. So we took everything, changed it all up, and essentially created Love is Love is Love like that. The concept was, how do we celebrate queerness? How do we celebrate different gender expressions and validate people and make them feel seen and respected and heard? The project was a really great success. And so the idea was to kind of take that from there and decouple it from the Orlando narrative and turn it into a broader project. It sort of fit within this interesting niche because when it comes to cultural depictions of LGBT relationships, there tends to be one of two poles. You either have depictions of LGBT people that's completely stripped of any sexual or romantic content. This is very sterile. And then you can have another pole, which is maybe overly sexualized and really rooted in that culture. And, both have their place and both are valuable in their own way. But there was an unexplored niche in the center that talked about more of the romantic aspects of LGBT relationships in a more sentimental and candid way.
Yeah.
And that ended up being really wonderful. We went from city to city to city and saw a lot of digital engagements. And then the idea was, how do you grow from there and turn it into something that can change people's minds and go beyond just the LGBT community? Because by the very nature of social media, content is delivered to people who are already on board with your rights. We could see that even from our analytics, from our digital content, where 99.9% of the feedback is positive, and that's great. But that also means that we're not really reaching people whose minds need to be changed. So in 2018, the vision was, well, how do we take this digital installation and use this massive archive of queer positive content and shift into a physical installation that can engage a wider cross-section of society. So we did this massive banner installation in City Hall and basically took over the rotunda in Toronto City Hall. It was the largest installation ever done in that space. And then partnered up with Scarborough Arts to kind of clad their Scarborough sign, which matches the Toronto sign downtown, with LGBT content. And that went from neighborhood to neighborhood to neighborhood. And that's where we saw a little bit of pushback, but pushback is good because it shows that you're engaging with people who, might find this thought-provoking. The next year, we did something called the Big Gay Bus, which sounds silly, and it was designed to be silly. The whole idea was taking a TTC commuter bus and cladding the exterior in Love is Love content, and then taking the interior advertising space and replacing it with educational content designed for non-LGBT audiences. So answering questions like, what is the difference between sex and gender? What's the difference between someone who's a trans person versus a drag queen? Why is there no straight pride parade? Things that we kind of take for granted, but other people might not. And then the vision was to put the TTC bus primarily in suburban neighborhoods. So it still functioned as a commuter bus. Yeah. And we figure, if someone has never really been exposed to LGBT content, never had an opportunity to learn, and might be a little bit resistant, if they have to take the bus, they have to take the bus.
Yeah, exactly.
And if they're bored and they really have nothing else to do, and they read this content that's written in a very friendly way, maybe it'll begin the process of having them reevaluate their assumptions.
Yes.
And it doesn't have to be done all at the same time. You can't change someone's lifelong beliefs through a single bus ride. But if you can make the beginning of incremental change, then that in itself is valuable.
Yeah.
Then on top of that, we partnered up with a clothing company to get a seed fund for a scholarship, which is for STEM individuals, so science, technology, engineering, and math.
Yes.
And that's where the Inspire Awards comes in. So we partnered up with a few different companies to raise money for that, and then we implemented this scholarship that had 2 scholarships of $2,000.
Yeah.
And the idea here was to address discrepancies in LGBT acceptance across different professional sectors. Yeah. Because it's a lot easier to be LGBT in arts and culture and even politics versus being in tech or being in math or any of those fields. We don't like to talk about it, but it's true. I come from the arts, and sometimes even being gay can feel like an advantage. Mm-hmm. But when you're in tech culture, which can be really bro-y and have a lot of toxic masculinity, then maybe that's not the same. So how do we support future leaders who have shown, academic excellence and foster that so that they can be highly visible and be leaders for others in 5 to 10 years from now? Yeah. And then that ends up looping into the Inspire Awards. They reached out to me. You guys reached out to me, which has been fantastic. And now we're here.
Yeah, it's great. So, I remember seeing for sure the bus, and what was your experience in terms of feedback, either from within our community or from the bigger community?
It was interesting, overwhelmingly positive for obvious reasons. Yeah. I kept on getting people who I knew and hadn't spoken to in years reaching out to me and saying, oh yeah, we saw the big gay bus. Yeah. At the same time, we did see some negative reactions. The bus was posted on an Instagram page. I think it's called 6 Buzz News, something like that. It has about 1 million followers, very well known. And you go through the comments section and you see people misunderstanding what the intention of the bus is, saying, oh, they're shoving it down our throat. Some of the things were, a little bit misunderstood. So for example, one person said, well, why don't we have the big black bus? And I said, and I remember wanting to respond to them saying, that sounds like a great idea. If you want to champion that, I would love to help you out with that project. Yeah. It's not a zero-sum game. Just because this concept has been used constructively for one oppressed community doesn't mean that other communities suffer. Why don't we just use that experience to help everyone? Yeah. But there's always going to be some negative feedback, and seeing how there was debates in the comment section showed that, there were people who were trying to engage others. Mm-hmm. We did have this one right-wing, very right-wing Facebook group. And some of the comments there were disturbing. I think someone had said, take the exhaust pipe and put it back into the bus to kill everyone inside. Ooh. And I was like, Yeah, I was like, that's not great. No. But the funny thing is that, this is just a minority of cases. I'm bringing them up because they're, shocking, and they're a bit more interesting to talk about than the vast majority of the feedback, which was like, oh, this is really cute. This is really nice. This is informative. So on the whole, really great project. Ran for 6 months, engaged hundreds of thousands of people. It's pretty awesome.
Yeah, great. That's great. So How about if you can speak a little bit about what inspires you about our community in Toronto specifically?
In what sense?
Just in terms of what do you see that is really working well for us, and how does our community come together to support each other and educate the public about the fact that, hey, we're here and we're.
What I really admire about the LGBT community is its focus on helping the most marginalized. I think that the way that the community is very cognizant of who gets left behind is something which should be replicated in other parts of society as well. Having that hypersensitivity to justice is critical. I also think that the passion with which people defend their community is great. I went to go record the protest and counter-protest for that Christian positivity rally, last year, with that pastor who does these provocative stunts. And one thing that I walked away from that was seeing all these people who I knew casually just showing up to do their part. People are very committed to coming out and being visible and advocating for their rights and for the rights of the people that they know. And I think that commitment to social justice is exceptional.
Great. So is there anything that you would suggest that we could do to make our community better?
So I would say we need to be focused on more than just the downtown core, and we need to focus on how to get programming and engagement out into the inner suburbs and the 905 suburbs. So the inner suburbs would be Etobicoke, North York, and Scarborough, and the outer suburbs, exactly what it sounds like. The reason for that is that there seems to be an assumption within the LGBT community that when you are able to, you move downtown and you live in gay enclaves. And for those who are left behind, that's just their problem. They have to deal with that.
Right.
We kind of like to forget about the suburbs and just leave them be. But the fact is that the vast majority of people are going to be living in suburban neighborhoods. Downtown Toronto is only about 750,000 people. The GTA is about 6.5 million. So just statistically speaking, the majority of LGBT folk are going to be living outside of downtown core. And the way that urban geography is today is such that downtown cores tend to be affluent and whites, and inner suburban neighborhoods and suburban neighborhoods tend to be more ethnically diverse and socioeconomically disadvantaged. So if we're concerned about supporting disadvantaged segments of the LGBT community, and if we're concerned about racial justice, we need to get programming and infrastructure outside of the downtown core and into suburban neighborhoods. One way to think about this is Pride. Pride is downtown, that's great. But if you're a young queer woman who's living with her parents in Malvern or Rexdale, what does Pride mean to you if you have to commute an hour and a half each way to get there? Especially if you're living with a family that, may surveil your movements. Right. Is Pride accessible? And what does it mean that if you want to engage with the LGBT community at all, you have to, factor in at least 3 hours of commuting? I grew up in the suburbs. I grew up in Etobicoke. It took me an hour and a half to get downtown. If I stayed there, my ability to feel like I'm part of a community would be completely constrained. So I think that that's a really big point that we tend to forget about, and it also tends to cause us to forget about the geographic discrepancies in acceptance. The downtown core is a little bit of a bubble. It's great that I can hold my partner's hand when walking around downtown. Would I feel comfortable doing that in the neighborhood that I grew up in? Not parts of it. Are there parts of the inner suburbs where I wouldn't feel comfortable? I don't always feel safe there. Yeah. And I think the thing is that we sort of make the assumption that the level of acceptance that we see downtown is everywhere. And that's unfair to the people who are living in the inner suburbs who need support. from community leaders who are physically very far away from them.
Yeah.
So that's my main takeaway.
Yep. No, I totally agree with you. I spent a lot of time in outside areas, and I'm not always comfortable holding my partner's hand either.
Yeah.
So, and I've been in downtown Toronto for like 30 years. So I've just come to accept that I can do anything I want down there, but I better think about that when I'm outside of downtown Toronto.
Yeah.
So can you speak for a minute about why you might think that the Inspire Awards is an important event that we have in our community for celebrating individuals and groups?
So what I would say is that the Inspire Awards is really important for giving recognition to activists who otherwise stay in the background. Activism is really hard. It takes a lot of time and a lot of work when you're doing it right. Mm-hmm. And oftentimes it's thankless. I know, speaking from my experience, there were so many days where I was just lugging equipment around, tired, exhausted, mm-hmm. sweaty.
Yep.
And feeling, knowing that this is doing something for society, for the community, but it's hard sometimes. It really is.
Yeah.
And especially as an artist, like, I haven't always had the easiest financial circumstances, mm-hmm. and you make a sacrifice sometimes.
Yeah.
And so I thought to myself, I'm doing something good and has value to other people. But sometimes you get tired. Mm-hmm. And I think that with the Inspire Awards, giving recognition to those behind the scenes activists, to those leaders who are not otherwise recognized, that really helps. And it's not as if myself or other people are doing it for the recognition. But it's just when I got a call from you guys, it was just like, oh man, this feels really nice. Mm-hmm. It's a nice little bonus. It makes you feel seen. It makes you feel validated. And I guess, like, there's a piece of me that thinks, oh, is that okay? Because you shouldn't be doing it for the validation. You shouldn't be doing it for that. But we're all human. And there's that very human part of you that just enjoys it. And it sort of it refreshes you a little bit.
Yeah. Well, with this being our 10th anniversary, we certainly know that the recognition of people who are doing work like you are doing is critical to not just those of us in downtown Toronto, but like you said, like outside the downtown core, that, kids who are up in Owen Sound, for instance, in the last couple of years, they've actually had a Pride Day up there. And mm-hmm. those kids in that community, they ran the Pride Parade themselves to say, we've got support mm-hmm. from a larger community. So amazing. And do you have any closing remarks for us this afternoon?
Yeah, what I would say for anyone who's interested in engaging in activism, just do it. It's one of those things where there can feel like there's a big chasm between, a successful initiative versus your intention.
Yeah.
You might think, where do you begin? And the fact is that there's a lot of small steps that are just invisible between, successfully implementing a project versus, like, conceptualizing it. So, like, if you want to do something to better the world around you, if you, have an idea, if you want to be a social entrepreneur, don't let the bigness of that ambition dissuade you mm-hmm. from things. It may seem very remote. It may seem hard. If you just keep on chipping away at it, eventually you get there and you start seeing results, and it ends up just accelerating with time. But persistence and proactiveness is what matters. And just, yeah, so long as you're persistent, so long as you just do the work bit by bit, you'll make change. And all that you need to do is just go out and do it.
Great. Well, Adam, I want to congratulate you again on your award and recognition for the clearly amazing work that you are doing. And I want to thank you for your time this afternoon. And I want to remind you that on September the 18th at 7 o'clock, both on our Facebook page as well as the Inspire .ca website, we will be hosting a live event, and Martha Chavez, comedian, will be hosting, and hopefully we'll see you there. And you know, sometime as we get through this COVID mess, I'll get to meet you in person because you're an amazing guy.
Thanks. Thank you. I hope so too. I hope November works out, but if not, I will still be there in September regardless.
Right.
Unless something horrible happens, like if I get COVID or who knows. It's a crazy year. Anything's possible. But barring any exceptional circumstances, I will see you there. And thank you for this opportunity.
Great. Thank you very much for your time. And I'm going to say goodbye.
Okay. Goodbye. Have a good day.
You too.